All right, guys, in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this new process 246 transfer case, and we're going to be doing a complete teardown and disassembly in preparation for a rebuild. This particular one is out of a 99 Suburban, old body style carryover model. These came out in 98. They were used for several years and had several design changes along the way. But pretty much what I'm going through here should cover any 246 and even a lot of the 236 as we go through that. Normally when I do something like this, my first go-to is the service manual. And I happen to have the last old body style edition, which was 98. But as it turns out, this is an example where that's not always the best choice, right? The service manual in 98 ended up having a lot of revisions. If we take a look, it does cover the 246 because that was the first year that it came out on 4/2/23. But what we'll see on here is, even though it covers the transmission, there are a lot of incorrect torque values that are used, incorrect tools that are suggested, and incorrect procedures. Like I dog-eared this one, for example. You can take a look here where they talk about how to do the clutch pack shimming procedure. This is far, far easier after this, starting in 99 when they revised this. But they used to have this whole stack of weights, right? 100 pounds of weights. Had to get a micrometer out here. It was a huge production to redo the clutch pack. Fortunately, this was just for 98, and they got rid of it pretty quick. Here's an example of the incorrect tool. They tell you to use a J29162 to put the rear output shaft seal on. That's actually the wrong tool. It doesn't fit properly. It's not notched. And you can find lots of examples like that. The torque values that they use on the sensors are way too high. It'll end up shattering them when you torque them down. So if you go on to GM service information, you'll find that there's a revised edition for this, and we printed it out here, and this is what we're going to be using today. We're going to be using this to disassemble this. So I'll be walking you through the actual GM docs while we actually show everything in a lot of detail and close up like I do in all my videos. The idea is to get us down to a complete matching of this parts explosion. This is for the rear half of the case, which is what you see right here, right? So the rear half, you can kind of note some of these parts, right? Number 16 is the plug we see over here. Number 7 is one of the vehicle speed sensors that we see right here, for example, right? So we're going to end up pulling all this apart to that point, and then we're also going to pull apart the interior. We'll separate out the clutch pack and all of the pieces here, and then the last piece I think will be, the back half, or the front half rather, and we'll end up exploding this out as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be using this rather than our original service manual. They talk about some tools and things that I won't be using. So for example, the dealership would have these fancy holding devices that would clamp onto their benches, and you bolt this thing up. We're not going to be doing anything like that. So I'll let you know when there's something that is a DIYer or a home shop that you would skip. But this procedure is going to cover the 236 as well as all 3 flavors of the 246. This particular vehicle we're doing is in a carryover model, which has a non-preload clutch. It's the K utility out of a Suburban, but that would be the same if it was a K pickup. And then it's also used in the new body style pickups, which do have a preload clutch. So we'll skip this setup. We're just going to be working here on a wooden workbench for this procedure. And the first thing they talk about doing is removing these fill and drain plugs. So we're going to remove those with an 18 millimeter ratchet. Right, and we're just going to we're not going to show everything here, right, but we're going to pop through this. The only thing I'm going to highlight on this is I grabbed a couple of service bulletins. Sometimes if I see something, I think it's worth sharing with you. So if you did have a 98, there was a design change on these plugs, and the original ones, rather than being hex head, these are aluminum, by the way. And the case is made of magnesium, and they had an Allen type connector on them, or a fastener to be used, and what would happen is they would strip out. And so this bulletin here is just to talk about the fact that how you get those out if you end up having this problem. They don't want you to use a flame. They want you to use an electric heat gun to heat that up, and then you can get a bolt extractor in there to pull these stripped out plugs, and then they give you the part number for the kind that we see that they started using in 99 and on up, which were hex head. So we're going to go ahead and pull both these out with an 18 millimeter, and then we'll pick up with the next step. All right, you may have a little bit of residual fluid even though you drained it before removing it from the vehicle, so we're just going to keep a little bag here to catch that. We're going to put these parts in bags, and we're going to number them corresponding to the parts explosion that we showed before, right? So number 8 and number 9 correspond to our fill and drain plug locations. And we're going to do the same thing as we take everything apart here. We're going to keep all the old parts so that we can clean and inspect it and determine what it is that we need to replace. All right, let's keep going. The next step in the manual here is that we're going to go in and remove the encoder motor. It's held in by 3 15mm bolts. And then after that, we're going to pull the vent and seal. So we're going to go grab those two now. So we're going to walk around to the other side, and we're going to grab our impact wrench. Going to go ahead and have our 36 part ready, and we're just going to go ahead and wiggle this guy out. All right, so you just want to see that you got the seal and all the tabs are there. So now we got number 36. All right, let's pull the encoder motor, 15mm. Grab your hearing protection. We're going to use an impact wrench for this one. All right. This guy should just wiggle off, but you might have to give him some persuasion. Key on all this kind of stuff is not to force anything. All right, so what you're going to end up with this guy is usually there's a lot of little stones and crap that end up getting back here. Get that out of the way. We'll go ahead and get these guys in a baggie and we'll keep going. All right, and so we've got our gasket 27. We've got our top, bottom, and medium number 29 bolts in the illustration, and we got number 28 our encoder motor. So we can put those away and we'll move on to the next step. All right, next step. Speed sensors. Those are going to be removed with a deep socket 19mm. Now these are all the same part, but we're going to go ahead and keep track of what position they came from, just in case we find some kind of damage internally. We'll be able to compare, what happened, right? So if we see some kind of problem on the wheel that this sensor is associated with, we'll be able to tell. So we're going to take this guy out, and then we're going to separately bag those as well. After you get the two rear speed sensors off, same size socket, you're going to take the front one off. You can see here we're keeping track of these. These are all part number 7 that we're distinguishing whether it's on the left hand, the right hand, rear. And when you get these off, there's also an O-ring, so be sure you retrieve the O-ring from the bore on all 3. This little guy over here as well. All right, let's see what's next in the manual. So we remove the 2 rears, we grab the front. Next thing they want us to grab is this access hole plug. That's another easy one. And by doing this system, guys, I just throw these parts into a box. I don't have to worry about where they came from or anything. All right, so this guy, we're just going to give him a squeeze. He pops right out. The next one after that, they're going to ask us to pull this seal in the back. We'll come back to that just so we don't have to shift the camera around. Next, they want us to grab the rear output shaft seal right here. All right, so this guy will just pop off. Make sure you put some eye protection on. Pop him off with a brass drift. I can get him into a good position. All right, there's that. Now, the next thing they would tell you to take off is the rear bushing that's inside the extension. They got a fancy tool, the dealership, to do that. This J45380, something like this will run you about $500 used on eBay. Now, that's because they were trying to change these bushings and seals without pulling the transfer case of the dealership. It was a common leak problem. We don't need to worry about that. We'll pull this out after we get further on the disassembly. So we're going to skip that step. And next thing we're going to have over here is to remove the transfer case, bolts, and washers. So we've got all these 15 millimeter vinyl clad bolts. So the steel can react with the aluminum and you'll get dissimilar metal corrosion. And so these bolts were originally clad in a black vinyl. Any of them that the vinyl has been compromised, some of these you can feel that it's peeled off, I'll have to be tossed. And then should be an aluminum washer. Yeah, there's aluminum washer here. This one's already loose because there was a retaining bracket for a wiring harness when we pulled this, and we elected to leave that attached rather than break anything. So what we're going to do here too as we go, I'm going to be using a little paint marker to mark certain things. I'm just going to remember that this is the one that had the bracket. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our 15 millimeter impact wrench and we're going to buzz all these off. All right, guys, if you take a look at these bolts, you can see they've got like a vinyl cladding that goes all the way down to right about there. And then they've got like a chromate type plating on them. It looks like kind of a gold color. Anyway, so we're going to put all these in a part number 10 labeled bag because since most of them are compromised where the vinyl's cracked and there's rust coming through. Some are better than others, but we're probably going to end up replacing most, if not all of them. All right, what's next? So next thing says after you remove those bolts, identify 2 places on the case where you can crack the gasket seal. So there's one right there. And there should be another one right there. Right. So now to get it the rest of the way off, there is a ring here. This is probably going to tell us. So we did both sides, and yes, we're going to need a pair of snap ring type pliers. Now there's different kinds you can grab. I've got 2. And what's important for this guy is, so this one opens up about 1 inch. And this one opens up about 1.5 inches. So we're going to want something that opens up well more than 1.5 inches or so. to get this guy out. But hopefully you guys can see that. There's the ears of the thing. You have to get it back in the middle where we can grab it properly. All right. So now we've got it off. We're going to use our screwdriver. Try and finish it the rest of the way. And periodically, this guy may even get back into position again. Eventually, you'll get him off. All right, so the very first thing we want to look at, so first of all, we've got some kind of crud in here. This is the main thing we were looking at. There's like a dried up transformation because of heat on the fluid. Now, we don't know exactly what caused that yet. That's part of why we're rebuilding this unit. We can see that our pump retainer is still intact. We're going to replace this with a design that improves this from GM. This is superseded. This was a very common failure problem. Fortunately, in ours, it did not fail. So let's see what's next in the disassembly. So we got the initial piece open. Let's just keep going, see what next thing we have to do is. All right, guys, if we look at the next step after we get the rear case half off, we're going to remove that pump wear sleeve. Like I said, this is a part that's been superseded and is obsolete now, but we're just going to go ahead and take it off. This is usually staked right here onto this little nub. All right, so we'll take that guy off. That's part number 13 on the parts explosion for that side. And now we're going to turn our attention over here to the rest of the assembly. If we turn the page, we're going to pull the snap ring, the bearing for the rear output shaft, and the rear output shaft speed sensor reluctor wheel. Just going to try and get some of this crud off of here. And like I told you guys, I like to keep things marked to the orientation. So we're going to use yellow for anything that faces the rear and its position. And then we're going to use blue if we need to know if something faces the front. So now we can take our smaller snap ring pliers. Can work this guy off. Yeah. To hold on to these to make sure they don't go flying. And this guy should just slide off. And this guy should just slide off. All right, what we're going to go ahead and do again, just because we want to keep track of, in case there's any reason we want to know for damage reasons. That way we know which side faced the rear. And the next thing we've got in here is a little wavy ring. We'll take this guy out. And similarly, we'll find a spot where we can try them up and give them a mark just so we know which side faced the rear while we try to figure out what happened to this unit. So looking ahead in our manual, the next thing after we pulled that shaft speed sensor reluctor wheel off, they want us to kind of pivot over here and grab the magnet and the oil pickup tube and filter assembly. So let's go see where that is. So here's the oil pump. Here's the pickup tube. So we can get the separator from the pump there. And here's our magnet, which, like any of these, is usually full of pieces of silicone from the factory. So I'll get that out of the way. We just zoom in under here, we can see where this is located, right? So there's the magnet, and there's the pickup. I don't know if there's enough light out here. We might have to just pause for a second and bring a flashlight over here, but let's see if we can keep going here. So we're going to try to get our pickup tube out of the way. All right, so there's just crud piled up on the filter end. And then our magnet just slides out. And he's got some crud too, but it looks like, again, just soft material, mostly silicone, tons and tons of silicone. But we'll go through and make sure there's no metal pieces as part of the cleanup and inspection process. All right, let's get these bagged and keep going. All right, guys, so we pulled out the magnet, and then we pulled out the filter, the little hose that connects the filter to the feed pipe, and then they don't show it in the picture, but there's also an O-ring in this pump. Now, they do mention remove the oil pump suction pipe O-ring. So we're going to come in here with a small pick. We're going inside the pump, and if we zoom in, there's a small O-ring right there that we want to retrieve. All right, we took the wave washer off the front of this, and now we can remove the pump. Now, if we go back and consult the service manual, they talk about there being two different types of rear output shafts. So they're trying to have you understand those two types, type 1 and type 2. And you can tell by the placement of this oil hole here, oil gallery hole. And so if we look at those pictures, we can see on ours that we have a type 2, which is the original design, which is what we would expect for 1999. And if yours is not in this position, you have a later model that you're watching this video. They talk about that to show you that, so it's down here. So this is only important if you end up for some reason having to replace the shaft. The original one's not made anymore, and you have to kind of back service it with the newer one, and there's a bunch of stuff you have to go through to do that. This is just a disassembly video, so we're not going to cover that. All right, so we've got the wave washer off, we've got the pump off, we've identified the type of output shaft we have, and depending on what type you have is whether or not you have that wave washer. So the original design had the wave washer, the newer one will not. There's going to be a output shaft retaining ring, which we see down here. And we're going to end up having to pull that off. So that retaining ring is right here. So we're going to grab our snap ring pliers and we're going to pull that guy off. The opening is on the other side. Man, this guy is a pisser to get off. All right. All right, and then we've got one more right here. All right, with those out of the way, this guy's free to come off. Now we got to get the one on this side. Same deal. You notice I'm always holding my hand on these because we just don't want them to go flying. They're very easy to take to flight. That should be all that's holding this one on too. So we're just going to lube this up so it's going to come off nice and easy because we're going to take it off from the front. this guy back a little bit. Try to clean up some of our debris from all the silicone and stuff from the magnet and the pickup tube. And then we're going to slide these off together. And we're going to keep them together. Set them right here for now. All right, and then we got another level of visibility here. So again, we can see this kind of dried up resin of what was some of the fluid for some reason. I don't believe I've ever seen that before. All right, so let me get some of these parts out of the way and get them bagged up, and we'll keep going. All right, guys, so after you pull the sprockets in the chain, the next thing they're going to want us to do is remove the rear output shaft assembly. So that's this point just going to work its way right out of the housing, just like that. And this is all a complete assembly. We're just taking a look here just to see if we see anything obviously damaged. Now, I'm not going to go through the same order as the service manual here. So they're probably going to tell us to disassemble this. Yeah, so they're going to walk through disassembling this. So we'll come back to this, but I want to continue on with the case first. So I'm going to skip ahead past disassembling this rear output shaft assembly. And we'll come back to that. We're going to pick it up here where we're going to start removing the actuator fork. It's held in by these pivot pins. We're going to need to get a 12 millimeter impact socket on here. So let me go put this guy somewhere else, and then we'll come back and start that. All right, guys, like I said, this is a 12 millimeter Allen head. Now, these guys are really corroded, but it should still just fit in there. And what's going to be happening is these are holding in this shift fork. So we're going to take both of these out, then we'll begin to remove these other components. So get your eyes and get your ears. Yeah, crap. That's what I was afraid of. All right, so that one is so rusted out that it has chewed up trying to get it out. So now we're going to have to resort to some type of extraction technique to get this out. What we wanted to do is get these two out so that we can then remove this piece. If we look ahead in the manual, after we take both of these clutch lever pivot pins out, it would have had us take the shift detent spring bolt out. We'll show that later, but then this fork or clutch lever, call it a fork, but it's a clutch lever, would have came out. All right, so guys, I'm going to go deal with this unexpected corrosion problem. See if we can figure out how we're going to get this guy out of here given that problem. All right, guys, next up is to remove the shift detent spring bolt. It'll take off the plunger O-ring seal, spring and plunger all as a unit, and that is right here, and that is a 23 millimeter aluminum guy. All right, so there's that piece. There's the spring. should be the plunger right here. And the O-ring is captured on the end, so we can put that whole assembly into a bag, and we'll continue with the next step. Now, we're skipping around because we have this problem here with this clutch pivot pin. I just want to keep going as far as I can before trying to deal with that. So we're going to skip over and skip taking out the fork assembly because we can't get that out of the way along with the planet. And then what we'll do is we'll go after this front output shaft seal. So there's going to be some explanation about the 236. So since we're not doing a 236, I'm going to skip ahead. This is 236, 236. And then for the 246, we'll pick it up here where we have this piece. We're going to be working on this assembly here and getting this out of there. So let me get everything cleaned up and get our little plunger bagged, and we'll start on that. All right, so we're going to remove this inner retaining ring for the front output shaft bearing, and then we're going to take a dead blow hammer and we're going to knock it through from the seal side. So if you look down here, we've got this propped up. There's the retainer ring right there. So we're going to wedge. If we go all the way on this side, we zoom in from this top view. You can see that we're able to pull this guy out, get him up like that. And then we're just going to work our way around, prizing him out. I wish I had a smaller screwdriver handy, but I don't. Whoops. Go. And we'll get the other side going here and be able to lift it out. All right, there's that out of the way. And we're just going to reposition that. You can see, guys, like a whole chip of this dried up fluid came off. It's very interesting. Never seen anything like this before. All right, then we're just going to tappy tap him out. All right, so there's that. Now we've got the seal still in here, and we're going to need to work that seal out next. I think we'll go back and consult our manual and see what it says. We're going to need to get another little piece of wood to prop this guy up as well. Okay, so next thing on the 246, take a punch and remove the seal from the case half. Then after that, they're going to want to remove the outer retaining ring for the other side of the bearing. Then remove the bearing. All right, so we marked that retaining ring with yellow, and it's a front case half, part 30, so we've got that set. And we marked this guy in yellow to know what side he's going on, and then when we get done, we're going to pull that ring. But for now, we're going to take our punch and we're going to go after the seal. Make sure we're grabbing this guy right. It's so black with crud. I want to make sure we're not hitting the case. We're hitting the seal. Just stop. All right, guys, this one is in here really, really tight. If we take a look underneath here on the bottom view, you can see we finally have one edge of it protruding. We actually had one area where the punch went right through the seal. It's just kind of really wedged in there, but we're going to keep working it out here for you. so that's only part of it. That's like the steel part of the seal has come off. Inside spring part of the seal. But the main part of it is still wedged in here. All right, so the seal's separated because it's all rusted together. So we're just going to try to weaken it around the edges. And then we'll try again to push it out. All right, with this guy weakened, we should be able to get it. Whoops. It's okay. There we go. All right. So he was just in there really, really tough. It's a lot of corrosion. Yes, there's not really a problem with the bearing or the seal surface, but we can just see there's this caked up material that got in there, and then the corrosion happened within the seal components itself. This is made of steel, this is made of steel, and these two pieces just corroded. All right, well, we got it off, and we didn't damage anything on the magnesium, which is all that really matters because the seal's got to be replaced during the rebuild anyway. So let's move on to the next. All right, now we got the seal out. We're going to move ahead to taking this outer retaining ring off of the front output shaft so that we can free up the bearing, and then we'll be able to remove the bearing. So we've gone ahead and marked what faces the rear. We're going to flip it over. There's the guy we're after. Some of this oil off of here. These kind of are super tight, usually. Let's see if we can get this out enough to... Finally, guys, Jesus Christ. All right, so should be able to, I don't know if we have to push this bearing off. We probably have to push it off with the press. So that's the next thing we'll do. We'll pull this off, and that's the end of the disassembly on this. They talk about being able to pull off the speed sensor reluctor wheel, and you could certainly do that if you needed to, but we're not going to touch that because, for one thing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. There's not any cuts, gouges, scrapes, burn marks, or anything, so I'm not going to pursue that, but if you wanted to, it could be pressed off using the technique they show here, or you could also get a bearing separator. And then they talk about here that there's a plug on the end, right here. And they say if it's leaking, you can remove it by punching through a brass drift. So they're talking about coming through like something like this and pumping this guy out, but we don't have that problem, so we're also not going to disassemble that part either. It's really not anything that I'm concerned with. And then we'd be picking back up with the planetary set from the piece we skipped earlier. So we'll come back and knock those pieces out. And that is about all we have left to go here. Just a few more pages after that. Got a bearing over here on that side that we can't get until we get that pivot pin out. All right, so it's time to chase the pivot pin. All right, guys, we're just going to press this bearing out. The press. Doesn't take much to get it out, but it's going to be a tool like this. You slip that under the bearing, set it in your press, and that's how you remove something like this. All right, guys, the technique we decided to go after for this stripped out pivot bolt was a chisel technique. So it took a few hits, as you can see, to finally get enough of a bite to break the torque, but we've got it out. So this will come out with a washer, and you can see there's an O-ring as well. This is another part that's going to have to be tossed and discarded. Now with that out, we can remove this piece. And we've marked the end of this that faces up, this piece here. Now this piece comes out and touches the bottom. Now with that piece out, we can take off this whole assembly. Here's another long ass piece of silicone, and then we can separate these two. So we'll mark this in the up position, and then these pads here will end up getting replaced as well. We'll mark those. So this is the part of the manual that we skipped before because we had that problem. Now I think we have to pick up in the manual, because I believe there's a retaining ring holding us from continuing here. So let's go back and consult our manual and pick up where we left off. All right, guys, we're going to return back to that step on page 5 of removing the input shaft seal, where you just take a screwdriver and pry it from the front case. What we elected to do was deform the seal on this side so that we can now work it up on this side. All right, so all we did was we kind of whacked it in on one side to weaken it so that we could prise it up on the other side. All right, and with that out of the way, now we've got another ring down here that we need to release. So barely enough room to get our tool in here. Let's see where she's binding up on here. It's binding up on the front. There we go. All right, with that out of the way, we can catch up on where we were in the manual. So we've got the input shaft seal out, and we went through all this. We skipped taking apart the output shaft assembly. We'll come back to that last. We picked it up with this troublesome clutch lever pin. We pulled out this. Now we removed our clutch lever, which we showed earlier. We removed the shift fork shaft. We got the range shift fork and the range shift sleeve as a complete assembly out. We separated the range shift sleeve from the range shift fork, and we just removed this outer retaining ring from the input gear bearing. So at this point, we should be ready to take out the planetary carrier assembly. So depending on the version of the 246, it either has a 4 or a 6 pinion gear planetary. 4 pinion with RPO M30 has 27 teeth, 6 pinion with MT1 and N8 has 32 teeth, and the 236 has a 3 pinion carrier. So in order to remove these, we should just be able to pop this out, and then it talks about some disassembly on the 236 here, about the dust shield. And then it comes back over here saying that the shaft seal in the 246 may be an internal design. The seal is a two-piece force fit on the front output shaft. The removal of the seal is different, shown later in the disassembly procedures. So then they go on for some more stuff on the 236 about taking off that seal, removing the bearing retaining ring, removing the output shaft assembly. Again, I'm skipping through this because we're not working on the 236, but here it is for you if you are. And then we're back to where we already did, right? So we had skipped ahead here. So if we can just get this guy out, we'll be caught up. So let me get stuff cleaned up here, and we'll do that. All right, guys, let's get this planetary assembly out. All right, we still have one more bearing down here. Now we have this guy out. So again, we don't see any obvious damage, but there's still some further disassembly we can do on this piece. And then we have this bearing here. So more cleanup, and then we'll keep going. All right, continuing on, we're up to page 32 of 38. Remove the planetary gear shaft retaining ring. So we got another one of these deals. I don't know if it's easier just to try and prise these kind out. Can't tell. Yeah, it's probably easier just to prise these type out. All right. And then after we remove that, we should have some type of washer assembly here. And a thrust washer, which is this silver guy right here, I presume. Nope, must be stuck to this one. Yep. All right, and after the thrust washer, take out the input gear, and very helpful to have a magnet on this job. We've got another little guy down here. Input ring gear thrust washer. And then in this side, there is a pilot bearing that will drive out with a drift. And we'll come back to do that in a moment. Remove the input bearing retaining ring from in here. So let's grab this guy. Same kind of thing. Not a whole lot of room though. Got that guy out. I don't know if this bearing just sits in there. Yep. Take that guy out. All right, the only thing left on this whole thing, on this case here, is this piece for the encoding motor. So hopefully that's coming up next. Let's take a quick look. Took the bearing out. They talk about how to remove it from the 236, very similar. All right, then they move back to the other side of the case to pull off one of the bearings that are on there. And let's just skip ahead and do this, right? So if we want to get the last piece on here, we got our snap ring holding this guy on, a little tiny one. Let's see if one of our tools will fit that. Okay, we got that off. I presume that, yep, that's going to let that slide through. So we'll pick it up like this so that we don't drop it. We'll push it through. All right, so now we have that piece off. For the encoding motor, there's still a needle bearing kind of assembly inside there. Let's see what it says about that. All right, so we remove the actuator lever shaft, inspect the bearing and seal. If the bearing is leaking or faulty, remove. So you only have to remove if it's damaged. Well, we can't tell if it's damaged with what's going on here, but we'll clean it up. We'll make a decision later if we're going to remove it. Let me go ahead and bag the parts we've got here and pick up the last few things we've got left. All right, guys, after we get the planetary assembly out, there's this snap ring in here holding this ring gear that it sat in. The disassembly manual doesn't talk about removing it, but because of this crud, that we've got going on in here, we want to get a lot of good cleaning. So we're going to go ahead and pop this guy out. So there we go. All right. Now we got one end freed up. Just walk it out. I believe this guy is pressed in here, and unless there's something wrong with him, that would be one heck of a large blind hole puller to get that guy out, so that's probably why they don't talk about doing anything. So we'll leave him in, but we'll clean up the snap ring and the groove and we'll replace that. All right, guys, we're going to swing back around. We skipped step 87 and 88 of page 35. So we're taking a look inside here. My inclination on a rebuild is to replace all bearings. I don't see anything particularly wrong with this guy, but 24 years or so, about 300,000 miles, we're going to go ahead and knock him out. So we're just going to try and take note of where he sits along the edge. So when we put the new one in, we have a good idea of how it sits. So there's a little bit of a bevel, and then it rests on there. All right, so we're going to take it out with a brass drift. That's all there is to it. Be another part that we end up replacing, right? So these two have been disassembled down as far as they can go, and we'll go ahead and bag and number them. This is internal transfer case, part number 35, for example. Okay, let's go to the next step. All right, guys, we just got a couple things left on the rear case half. So the manual never mentioned it, but one of the things that we need to go do when we first got this guy pulled apart, we released this ring in here. It never mentioned to take it out, so obviously we want to do that. So we're going to reach down here and pull that guy out. Now the manual does pick up and mention removing this bearing over here. Now they show in the manual they've got a slide hammer and they've got this kind of thumb screw adjusted blind hole bearing puller, which is a single purpose just for this particular thing. It's called a J23907, and then the 26941 I believe is the slide. Actually, that's backwards. The 23907 is the slide hammer, and the 26941 is the puller. We're just going to be using a generic puller, right? And something like this, the way it works, I was just sizing up the appropriate one here. Take it out for a second, show you. So similar to what they have, so in the manual, right, they've got a thumb screw and it causes two sides to open up. This design, we've got a single pin and it causes three sides to open up. And we want to get this lip under the bearing that we see right here. And there's just enough room to get a tool like this in there, and then we want to get the edge against the case. So we just open it up, we pull it up against the bearing until it feels like it's right near the bottom, and then we expand it the rest of the way. Whoops. and then this will have a slide hammer kind of attachment that fits over it. And that's what we'll use to pull this out. You don't want to get it too tight against the magnesium. We want it just enough that it's not going to pop out, but snug enough that snug enough that it's not going to come out, but loose enough that it's going to move. So I'm going to get this set up, guys, and we'll come back and we'll yank this one out. All right, guys, the slide hammer did not have enough oomph, so we're using this other attachment in the kit. A couple of pieces of wood to protect the magnesium finish. You can see we've got this popped out a little bit. And what we're doing is we're using a heat gun, not open flame, too much of a fire hazard with all this lubricant around. And we're going to heat up the outer shell. If we come around the outside here, it's very convenient. All of the open area around the bearing is accessible to us. So we're just going to keep heating this up. Now, this is an industrial heat gun. Can get up to 1,000 degrees if you need it to. The magnesium's thermal properties are quite different than the steel and the bearing. Basically just trying to open it up. And then we come back around on the other side and we just bear down on the nut. So you see it's coming out, guys. It's going to take it a while. We're going to keep doing whatever we can to encourage it along. If it ever feels like it's stuck, just heat it up again. All right, so we got that one off now. Looks like we liquefied a lot of this dried up crud in here too. All right, so making sure we didn't get any scoring on the inside. It's still hot from our tool. But basically, that's how these kind of tools work, right? So your bearing gets caught underneath, and this guy just pulls it out. And it's what you want to do is you want to make sure you don't get it opened up enough that you're rubbing up against the walls of where this guy sits. You just want it right on the steel race so you can pull it out. Okay, so the only thing we have left in the rear case at this point is this bushing on the tail shaft. There's nothing left but the bushing on the tail shaft. We got one more item on the front side, and that's that small needle bearing for the encoder motor. So let's get that now. All right, last one of these bearings, guys, in the front case half. So we're going to go after this the same way as we did that one in the rear case half with one of these blind pullers. So we've got this positioned up here with some wood to protect us. And if we go on the inside, what we can see if we zoom in, we can see how the teeth of this thing are expanding in. There's a very small ridge. I purposely have got the tool off the ridge so you can see it. But we're going to get the tool on that ridge You can see the difference in color between the magnesium case and the steel of the bushing. You can just see just a few little needle bearings poking through in this view. We're going to position out in there. We're going to see if we can pull this out. All right, guys, just figured I'd put you in here as we work this guy out. It's going to make a lot of little pops as it works its way through. All right, and there he is. So these kind of blind pullers are a must-have tool for doing this kind of work. I'm going to set this guy down here. If we come and look on the other side, just to the nature of this thing, when you pull it out, it's not uncommon to see a few of the roller bearings pop out of the way. And so it gets pushed in from this side. You can see there's a lip inside that it seats on. So it only goes in so far. All right, at this point, there is nothing left on the front case half. It's time to just catalog and clean it and get ready to go analyze all the parts we took. We still have two things left. We've got the bushing and the rear tail shaft, and we've got disassembly of the rear output shaft assembly that we skipped before. So we'll go do that, and that'll be the end of this video. All right, guys, remember we early on page 6, we skipped removing the output shaft bushing from the rear tail shaft case because the service manual called for this fancy tool that this J45380 that runs about $500. So we're going to take it off now, but we're going to push it out a different way. One of the things we're going to do, though, is we see I've got a couple of yellow dots here, which I marked the oil passages and the orientation of how the factory put this bushing in. This is very worn, so we're going to need to take it out. And what we're going to try and do is push it out with a 48 millimeter and a 50 millimeter adapter. So I think that's going to be okay, because if we look down from the top, we can see the bushing around the perimeter of the adapter. So the adapter is not going to get stuck in the case, but this is such a narrow bushing that, you know, we might have to try and go a little bit higher. But we'll start with this one and we'll see how we go. All right, guys, you can see she's going in. Might not even have to use the press. Yep, it'll come out nice and easy with these two sizes, 50 and 48. All right, that's it for that. One output shaft bushing. There's another view of the two passages that I was talking about earlier that we lined up there. All right, let's keep going. All right, guys, the very last part. So we're going back to the manual for the rear output shaft assembly that we removed intact and we skipped. And we're going to disassemble that now. I'm going to place that in a hole I've put on my little wooden workbench here. We set this aside so it didn't get dirty while we worked on everything else. This will let us get it into the position that we need to do this final disassembly. Now, the reason I put this off to the end is when you go to assemble these, they have a specific shimming procedure, and you need special tools to do that. And if you don't have those tools, then my advice is don't take this apart. Go take it over to a shop and let them take it apart and rebuild it for you. But if you do have those tools, which I'll show later on, and when I do the rebuild, I'll link that, then it's fine to take this apart. So, as we see in the manual, the first step is removing the clutch assembly retaining ring. So we're going to get that guy off. All right, guys, I think what I'm going to do to get this particular out is I'm just going to take our ply away because we got enough travel for that. And then I'm going to take a plastic tool here. Now I can see that, yep, that's going to do it. Right. All right, so we got that off. With that off, actually before we take that piece all the way off, as you guys remember, we like to keep a mark at which way this was facing. And again, just in case it's helpful for us to reference something when we're doing the further disassembly or cleaning. All right, switch this guy off of here. And there's a bearing in here that we're going to have to press out. We'll take that over to the press and get that later. And then there's a plate right here. This is the shim plate. This is the piece that gets set and adjusted with the special tool set. And then there's going to be a series of clutches, frictions and steels. If we take a look at the disassembly manual, they're showing that, right? So they're giving you an indication of these pieces and how they all go together. And that they're explaining that between the 236 and the 246, and whether you have a model that has a preload clutch or a non-preload clutch. Now this one we're doing is a non-preload. They explain here what's different and what you should see, right? So they mentioned that the non-preload pressure plate does not have a groove for the clutch spring. And the preload clutch pressure plate does have a groove. Then they mentioned on the friction plate for the clutch that the non-preload one has 8 grooves on the outside and 8 grooves on the inside, and the preload has 20. And then they mentioned for the spring, the preload spring is located in the groove of the pressure plate. The non-preload spring is located in the clutch hub. Then they mentioned about the oil restrictor plate is only used with the preload clutch, and that the backing plate on the 236 is thicker and has a shoulder, and on the 246 is thin and only has a notch. Right? So they're just explaining these things. So when we took ours off, we did not have this wave washer here, right? So unless we missed it stuck underneath, which I don't think, nope, so we don't have that. So all we had was the clutch pressure plate assembly, and then we had this first steel, which I think is a shim. We'll know for sure when we get inside. They explain here that you're going to take that bearing apart. We'll do that separate. We'll finish up with this first. They mentioned that inside here there's another retaining ring. So if we look down here, we do see that other retaining ring. Right, so it's right there. So let's get that guy off. Nice and greasy. Because I'm going to have to hold this against this particular spring, lock ring, whatever you want to call it. Just to get it to snap up. Fight it the whole way. There we go. Still got that dried up material all smeared around here that we'll have to deal with at some point. All right, with that out, let's make sure we didn't chew this guy up at all by trying to fiddle with getting that out of there. He looks fine. All right, let's see what our manual says now. So we just took the clutch spring out because this is a non-preload clutch. It says we should be able to turn it over and remove all of these pieces. So let's test that set of directions. Here's part of them. Couple more in there. All right, that is the content. Should be able to get this whole guy off the main shaft as well. And there we go. Alright, so we've got this all disassembled so that we can bag it and tag it. You want to take note that these clutches kind of lost the orientation when we took them out, but they're all going to be lined up like this internally, just like we saw when we took them out. So when you put them back in, you want to make sure they're all lined up like that. So just taking a look at what we got here, you know, there's normal wear on these for sure because of the age. They're all going to need to be replaced. But actually, we don't see that dried up fluid inside of here. It seems to be more of the normal kind of fluid. All right, the only thing we've got left, and then we are done, guys, is we need to separate these pieces. So let's go over to the press for that. All right, guys, so these last two pieces have bearings, right? So in this hub has, in this particular model year, is 2-piece bearing, right? So there's one piece here, and there's another piece here. If we zoom in, we can see the two different pieces, right? And so we're going to have to press them both out. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a couple of adapters here, a 50 millimeter and a 55. And that's going to get us like that. And we're just going to push these guys through on the press. Now the other one was this clutch pressure plate bearing. So we've got this piece here that is pressed into the inner race, and then the outer race is pressed into this assembly. So we're going to make a similar adapter for that. We're going to use a 45 millimeter. It's going to get us in the center. And then I'm just going to use a big 74. But just what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the main bearing out first and get it out of this outer piece. And then we'll be able to separate the inner race from the actual clutch piece here. And if you look at the manual, they talk about this here, right? This is my adapter set. So you got all these different sizes of these to do these kind of jobs. So here they talk about the pressure plate bearing and putting it up on your press and pressing that guy through as the second step, right? So the first step I talked about is getting the bearing and that piece there. And I just want to see what exactly they refer to that name as. Part number 31 is called an outer clutch support. So the outer clutch support is the part that we're going to leave on the bearing and pull out second. The other piece would be here. So this is our clutch housing. Now they show a 1-piece bearing in here, but this older one has a 2-piece bearing. So we're going to press that out as well. They mention you could use a brass drift and hammer it out, but it's just the same, just to press it out. It doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to go back to something I showed you earlier because it doesn't make as much sense if you don't have the picture. So I took the previous page out to kind of show. So again, we got a non-preload clutch 246 in this video. So that's item number 1 for the pressure plate. It doesn't have a groove for a clutch spring, whereas if you have a later model, it will, number 2. But we have number 1 in this video. And then for the friction plates that you showed when we took out the frictions and steels, 8 small grooves on the outside, 8 small grooves on the inside. The preload friction, the preload type friction plate has just 20 segments. You know, they call it grooves, but think of it like segments. About with these kind of 8 notches, if you were to count them around, they're very hard to see inside the plastic, but like right there is one of these notches. There's 8 of them on the inside and 8 of them on the circumference. And let's see where we leave off, the clutch spring. So they say that the preload clutch spring 5 is located inside of the grooves of that plate. And we don't have that because we have a non-preload clutch in this video. So the non-preload clutch spring is part number 6. We do not have part 7 because the oil restrictor plate is only used with the preload clutch types. And then on the backing plate, they show you that the 236 is thicker and has a shoulder. If we zoom in here, you can see they're showing like a little shoulder to this guy. But they're trying to show you on the 246, it's just got a notch. Now, all right, guys, when we zoom in here on these bearings before we get started, we're going to want to take a note of the gap of how far these are pushed in. So when we go replace them, that we get that same kind of gap, right? It's a little over a millimeter or 2, right? So you just want to take note of that. And then similarly, there's a gap on the outer edge as well. All right, and the other thing we're going to do before we get started here, I'm just going to grab some brown paper And all I'm doing that for is to stick under here to catch these guys so they don't go bouncing around on the floor. And then we're going to stick our 50 and 55 in here. And we're just going to press these guys out. Now they're going to be loud, so you probably want to put some hearing protection on. I think we've got them all the way through. Let's see. Yep. So we got this guy trapped in here, so you can see how the outer race is one piece, but then on the inner race, it's two pieces. This is what I was trying to show before. So if you didn't notice that, now you can maybe see it a little better. All right, now let's get the bearing out of the other one, the clutch. All right, so we got this piece now, the clutch piece. Stick a little piece of paper down there for the same reason as we did the other one, just so this guy doesn't go falling. I got a little net on mine that catches stuff anyway. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be coming in with a 45 and a 74, and it could be a little smaller than a 74. We just want to grab this clutch piece and the inside race on this bearing so we can push them through the other side. You obviously can't push from this side because you've got this little lever piece here on the clutch. So we got to get him out of the outer so that we can then extract him and the bearing out separately like they show in the service manual. When you get this set up on here, what you want to make sure of though is that this guy is free and not getting restrained by whatever you're pushing against. And you want to get as much of the rest of it on there as you can to spread the force. All right, guys, we'll go slow on because you never know if you might have misaligned it underneath. So we'll start it off and we'll check it, and then we'll go back underneath and we'll do it again. So we got a little bit. We're going to pull it up. And we're just trying to go nice and easy to make sure that we aren't pressing this in correctly. Right, so yep, it's coming out. So we can see the bearing has lifted out. Get this guy back into position and we'll continue. All right, we got it back in place. And again, something like this, you're just going to go slow because if you're getting kind of binding, that means we probably have something in the wrong position. It looks like it's going to go through just fine. There it goes. Well, it was a little bit too heavy for our net, but we got it out. All right, we picked this guy up. Now we've got it separated from the outer part of the clutch. So now what we have to do is, so you can see there's this piece here that's spinning around the inside race of the bearing. So what we're going to have to do now is push this piece out of the bearing in order to separate these last two. So we're going to have to get a different type of adapter and just do the same thing. All right, guys, if we zoom in on this one, so we can see the balls of the bearing through this side with the notch. Then there's a seal on this side. And since we have this piece here, what we're going to do is we're going to get our opposing force on the outer race here with our plates. And then what we're going to use is a 45 and a 52 just to push this inside piece out. .45 and 52 as far as our adapters go. Now it's a little off, so let me just give it a little bit of adjustment. And just push this guy through. You can see I'm popping through on the other side. This time we're going to catch him if he falls through. All right. There's our bearing. There's our piece. And then we've got to pick up our tool later. All right, guys, on the case half, you can see there's a small Phillips screw that's holding the identification plate on. If you want to, you can take this off so that you can clean it. I'm not going to take it off at this time. There is a risk that this steel screw has had some dissimilar metal corrosion with the magnesium case, and it could snap off, and you can end up having some drama there. So we're just going to, in my case, we're just going to leave it alone. But there it is if you want to do it. We're at the end, guys, cleaning and inspection, and I'm not going to walk you through this. Just a few highlights, right? As we were over here in the disassembly manual, there was an important note not to wash the clutch friction or pressure plates in cleaning solvent. You cannot do that. You need to clean them up with regular lubricating oil. They'll go through this section and they'll talk to you about where you can use a solvent and where you can't. Typically it'd be something like mineral spirits. You do not want to use any water-based cleaners on any of these parts that you took out of the internals, just like a transmission. These things will rust up very quickly. Just kind of skipping through here to see if there's any more highlights about not to use certain chemicals for cleaning. I mean, here's another warning about not using cleaning solvent on the clutch discs. This is just telling us some of the things that GM wanted the technicians to check for before reassembling in order to make decisions about which things to get replaced and which things could be reused. And we'll go through this and figure out what we need to order for this job, and then we'll film a video covering the reassembly of this unit at a later date. And when I have it, I'll link it up there. But yeah, I'm not seeing any other call-outs other than the warnings about not using solvent on the friction clutch pack assembly and not using any water-based cleaners on any of these hard parts. Typically on a rebuild, you're going to replace these plastic fork pads, all the seals, all the bearings. You should replace the bushings if it's got this much mileage, so we're going to be doing all three of those. And then it's just a matter of replacing other things that are busted and shot. Like you saw, we had our rusted out clutch pivot pins. We got a lot of rusted case half bolts with the vinyl covering that has worn off, so we're going to replace those as well. But yeah, I don't see anything else here. So guys, look, we're done. If you have questions or comments, leave a comment below. I'll try to help. This is another high-detailed, long-ass job. I hope it was valuable to you. It helped save you some time and money and get your job done too. Links in the description on some of the tools I used. And if you find that this video did save you something, take some time to hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.